All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hear me here? All right, I'm Ray Baudry. I'm the Gulf County Extension Director. Welcome to the Scallop Sitter workshop. So we're going to have a couple of presentations today, and then we're going to talk more about the cages as well. We have with us today Scott Jackson, who's the County Extension Director over in Bay County. Savannah Berry, who is Regional Specialized Agent for Sea Grant over in Cedar Key. And Miss Kelly, I know who you are. Miss Kelly Williams from FWC is here with us as well. So we're going to get this thing kicked off. I know it's a little warm in here. Our air conditioner is struggling a little bit, but we won't be in here terribly long about that. So let's get this thing kicked off. Savannah's going to talk to us today about seagrass and the importance of seagrass.
Okay, thanks. So we are actually recording this session and we're streaming it online in the Facebook group, which you'll hear a little bit more about later. So thanks for bearing with the mic switch there. Are we all good, Scott? Okay, excellent. So like Ray said, my name is Savannah Berry and I am based in Cedar Key, and I cover the Big Bend region, which, as you may know, if you're familiar with the open sea harvest area for scallops, pretty much covers that. And so scallops are a really big deal in my world, as is seagrass. So my background is in seagrass biology and ecology, and as the title of this talk suggests, seagrasses are in fact essential for bay scallop populations. And so I'm going to set the stage, set the scene a little bit for the rest of the information we're going to be learning, and kind of give you the broader context and give you some tips and tricks about maybe ways you can help seagrass. Okay, so this is the ideal. This is a site that I hope at least a few of you are familiar with. A great, beautiful, healthy seagrass meadow with a couple of scallops in there for good measure. So this is one of the things that made me fall in love with Florida when I first moved here from Virginia. This is a picture that I took in Homosassa when I was doing my very first field season here. And I've been in love with these ecosystems ever since. And I studied seagrasses for both my master's and PhD. So scallops do depend on seagrasses in lots of ways, and we're going to cover that. So I think, but first I want to tell you a little bit about seagrass biology. So they are fully submerged, salt-tolerant plants, and they're actually flowering plants. So they are more closely related to lilies than they are to the grasses that make up your yard. So they actually make a flower. This little pink flower is what turtle grass flowers look like. And turtle grass is one of our major meadow-forming species that we have here in the Gulf. We have 5 seagrass species that are common, but the most important ones in terms of scallops and just general forming expansive meadows are the turtle grass, which is this one here on the top, that flat, bit larger strap-bladed seagrass. And then the other one is the manatee grass, or Syringodium filiforme. It's got a cylindrical blade, kind of like a chive or a scallion, and that's how you can differentiate that one. So seagrasses do have fully developed vascular system. They have roots and rhizomes, and they have the ability to translocate gases and nutrients in between their leaves and their root zone. And that also allows them to attach in place and form stable, long-lasting habitat. And that is in contrast to macroalgae, those sort of fleshy tumbleweed types of vegetation that you see under the water, which are also important in their own right, but they don't form the type of stable, lasting habitat that seagrasses do because of this root and rhizome system. Seagrasses also require very good water quality, and you can translate that to mean lots of light reaching the bottom. So anything that creates the shade in the water, anything that causes the water to be darker or more turbid, meaning it has lots of particles in it, is going to negatively impact seagrasses. So if we get too many periods of time where we don't have enough light reaching the bottom, seagrasses will eventually die from that. So things like algal blooms or nutrient releases that cause the fuzz, the epiphytes that grow on the seagrass blades to predominate can negatively impact seagrasses. So we need to protect water quality. So seagrasses have lots of ecological functions. I think the one that most people know just by basic intuition is that they create habitat and structure for lots of organisms. They have a whole lot more diversity of species that live within the canopy than you would find in, say, a neighboring sand or mud flat. That's kind of something that we know by intuition. But more specifically, since we're here to talk about scallops, they do provide essential attachment habitat for the juvenile scallop. So this picture here is showing a baby scallop, and it's actually attached physically to that seagrass blade by what's called a byssal thread, B-Y-S-S-A-L. And it's just a little small thread that the scallop sticks out and glues onto the seagrass temporarily while it sort of gets a foothold and grows up large enough to then detach and become a free-swimming scallop. So seagrasses provide habitat for lots of organisms, not just scallops. The best estimate that's out there is that about 85% of species that form recreational or commercial fisheries in Florida depend on seagrass for part of their life cycle or their entire life cycle. So it could be maybe just as adults or just as juveniles, but 85% is a pretty large percentage. So we really need to love our seagrass for that reason. But they do lots of other things. They aren't just a habitat and just a structure. One of the other most important things that seagrasses do is actually trap particles and stabilize the sediments. So we talked about that root and rhizome system that they have, but actually their leaves in the water column creates the water slows down, it baffles wave energy and allows particles to settle out, and then those particles get knit in place and held in place by that root and rhizome system. So that's really great. It makes the water clearer. It increases overall light availability for the seagrasses themselves. And it also reduces the amount of sediment that gets stirred up when we get wind and wave events. So it actually just increases water clarity across the board in our coastal bays and also within the seagrass meadows themselves. This is also important for scallops because scallops are kind of sensitive feeders. They are filter feeders, as Ray will cover in his talk. But they don't like to work really hard when they're filtering the water. They don't want to have to sort through a bunch of sand and muck in the water in order to feed. So they really like to spend their adult lives in seagrass meadows because seagrasses reduce that overall particle and sediment load in the water. And scallops are also sensitive to lots of other things like red tide, which will also be covered later. So that's a double whammy benefit for scallops there. Seagrasses have many other benefits. They sequester carbon, they take up a lot of CO2 being a photosynthetic organism, and they can actually store it down in that sand that's trapped below the water so it doesn't cause us as much trouble up in the atmosphere. And they also do provide a lot of aesthetic beauty through that improvement of water clarity. They're just this pretty green natural area. Of course, it's all a matter of opinion, but I find that most people's opinion is that seagrass is quite beautiful. And they do obviously add a recreational value, both through the fisheries that they support and also just making the water more inviting and better for us to snorkel in. And then finally, they do contribute a significant amount of oxygen to the water. As we know, things that live in submerged environments depend on dissolved oxygen in order to survive. And the seagrasses, being photosynthetic organisms, are constantly pumping out that oxygen during daylight hours and helping more things have more oxygen to breathe. So that's a great service that they provide. But unfortunately, we have a lot of threats to seagrasses globally and in Florida. Seagrasses are some of the most threatened habitats on Earth. They're being lost at an alarming rate, and I think it's estimated that globally since the early 1900s, we've lost about a third of our seagrass worldwide, and that just continues to occur. So we need to be careful and protect what we have remaining and also contribute to restoration. The leading stressor that's causing this massive decline is decline in water quality. Like I said at the beginning, they really require a lot of light, and so we know that in Florida we have issues with algal blooms, we have issues with siltation and sediment inputs to our coast, from coastal development, deforestation, all these types of things, and those are going to be really negative impacts to seagrasses. We have other things that can impact seagrasses negatively: overfishing, disease, sea level rise, dredging. But another really big one in Florida is physical damage from prop scars and anchors and grounding, running aground on seagrass meadows. And this is actually one that every single person can take personal responsibility for. This is one of the most easily preventable stressors that we have. Water quality solutions take a lot of collaboration, a lot of public support, a lot of time to fix. But this physical damage through the boating related damage, we can solve much more quickly by just having boaters take responsibility for how they interact with our seagrass meadows when they're out on the water. So just to give you an idea about maybe the scope of the problem here locally. So we are here for the scallop sitter workshops, and we have active programs in both Bay and Gulf counties. And these two counties have the most acreage of scarred seagrass in the Panhandle. So to just put some numbers on it, in Bay County, it's estimated that there's about 10,500 acres of total seagrass. And unfortunately, about 47% of that acreage shows signs of seagrass scarring. So that's almost half. And unfortunately, it's even worse in Gulf County. We've got about 8,100 acres of seagrass, and almost 60%, 4,800 acres of that shows some level of scarring. And the different colors on these maps are just showing you the different severity, whereas red is the worst, orange is medium, and yellow is sort of light level scarring. But still, you see there's widespread impacts from vessel recreational boating in both of these bays, so St. Joe Bay and St. Andrew Bay. And a lot of this does come from scalloping, at least in Gulf County, probably, because we have a large influx of boaters that are wanting to boat in seagrass because that's where the scallops are. We have a lot of visitors that maybe don't understand how challenging navigation can be in certain shallow areas and that kind of thing. These pictures were all taken from the Steenhatchee area, where it's definitely a big free-for-all, and we focus a lot on propeller scarring and reducing seagrass damage by both local and visiting boaters. So this is probably where a lot of it's happening, is during the peak summer boating season. Okay, so how can you help seagrasses? Well, the first is to participate in monitoring and restoration, and you're already here to participate in the scallop restoration, and that's really a great thing. But there are also opportunities to participate in or support seagrass restoration, and the seagrass meadows are really the foundation for the bay scallops. So if we don't protect our seagrass, we can spin our wheels doing a lot of scallop restoration and then maybe have issues down the road because the seagrass resources aren't there to make that a long-term sustainable population. So both of these bays have active restoration plans through the aquatic preserve system. So if that's something you feel like you might want to support or get involved in, you can reach out to the local aquatic preserve that pertains to you and get involved. Another one, like we talked about already, is practice seagrass safe boating. So there's a website, beseagrasssafe.com, that has lots of resources that you can share with your friends or your visitors. But the basic idea is to avoid boating over seagrasses whenever possible. Use deep channels, use known deep water areas to transit as much as possible. And then when you do need to transit over seagrass, make sure you understand the tide, when the low tide is. Make sure you don't get stranded out on a grass flat. Or try to run on plane at a tide where your motor will contact the bottom. Trim up when you're boating over seagrass to reduce the chance that your motor will impact the bottom. And then lastly, if you do find yourself grounded on a seagrass flat, the absolute best thing to do is turn your motor off, lift it out of the water, and push off of that flat, or wait for the tide to come up and lift you off. Attempting to power off is going to create the worst type of damage of all, which is a blowhole. And that is not going to recover on its own ever. Prop scars can recover naturally, but it takes a period of several years, somewhere between 1 to 2 years in the best case, and up to 10 years to maybe never in the worst case. So just cutting a scar, it's not like, oh, just mow the lawn, it makes it grow faster. No way. It actually really is harmful, and it can even cause expanding damage over time, especially in areas with high winds and currents and that kind of thing. So doing your part to protect water quality, like I said, solving large-scale water quality issues is really difficult, but there are things that all of us can do, like making responsible choices about landscaping, choosing native plants that require less fertilizer, following any fertilizer ordinances, or hiring a lawn maintenance company that uses green practices to reduce the amount of fertilizer. If you have a septic tank, keeping it in good working order and pumped out regularly. Hooking up to sewer if that's an option for you. Voting for types of things that will end up protecting water quality, science-based initiatives that are going to reduce impacts of stormwater and those kinds of things. And like I said, using your voice or civic power. You have a lot of power. Florida state agencies do pay attention to stakeholder comments, so if you have time to attend those meetings and like I said, support other monitoring and restoration plans that are out there. Yeah, So those are things you can do to help seagrass and scallop season. Hopefully the end goal of the scallop sitter programs is to have sustainable open scallop seasons in both of these bays and more. And that is going to occur most easily when we have healthy seagrass meadows. And if you're interested in any of the online materials, these are the Facebook and Instagram accounts if you guys are into that kind of stuff. And also the Panhandle Scallop Sitters page can be found through the Nature Coast Biological Station Facebook page. So yeah, so that's just setting the scene of how important our seagrasses are, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you guys have them about seagrasses. Yes?
Has the state and FWC biologists, are they doing anything on these pristine estuaries that we have, doing anything about the stormwater runoff from these roads? Because you have gas and you got oils that are on there. Once it rains, it all goes into those areas. Is that pollution filling some of the grass off?
Yeah, so anything that impacts water clarity, so any of those types of contaminants, and there is some evidence, and I guess just to repeat the question is there's lots of, stormwater runoff chemicals entering these bays. What's being done to sort of address that? And I do know that both of the aquatic preserves here have restoration plans to address those types of things. I mean, riparian buffers, living shorelines, there's all kinds of things that can be done, but I think Ray and Scott maybe can speak better to what is being done. But I think that I just want to point out that there's not any such thing as a pristine estuary left in Florida, unfortunately. And even in the Nature Coast, which is almost completely undeveloped, we have lost something like, almost 90% of our seagrasses since the 1980s. Conversion from continuous to patchy cover. So even in areas where we don't have those challenges that you're mentioning, it's really sad. But there are things that we can do, and we just need to speak up for them and do them. I don't know if you have anything that you want to add to that, Ray or Scott.
Let me tell you about St. Joseph Bay. We have a shellfish lab over Appalachian Bay. They look for nutrient bacteria spikes. They're treated with non-source pollution much stronger. The Aquatic Reserve also tests.
Yeah, so the answer for those online was that there are ongoing monitoring, water quality monitoring things to try to pinpoint where those impacts are coming from. Anything else about seagrass? Yeah.
On the maps we showed a few screens back, where it showed the damage to the grasses, and you said the red is the worst.
Mm-hmm.
That red, the big red spot that's on St. Joseph Bay.
Yeah.
Where is that?
So the question is, where is that this big?
Geographically in our
Yeah,
numbers.
where is that red dot right here? Is that associated with a boat ramp or marina or Fresno's? Okay.
Just curious.
Yeah. Fresno's. Yeah.
I didn't mean to call it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's typical. All throughout the state, you're going to see scarring in, areas of channels that people cut. There's a lot of temptation for people to take shortcuts in channels, high traffic areas, marinas, boat launch points. That's where you see the most scarring.
If that's the worst area, is there educational information there, an effort to educate the tourists and the people that come there that are using the bay?
Yeah, so can you target basically scarring hotspots with education? And the answer is yes, and that's what we've been working on a lot down in the Cedar Key Crystal River area, is using aerial imagery to find those hotspots and place things like targeted buoys and markers. And I do believe there's an initiative about doing that here in St. Joe, basically telling boaters this is a really shallow flat and you probably are going to run aground if you come over here, kind of thing. Like, so warning markers to target those hot spots. You get a lot of bang for your buck out of that. And then we also have a suite of online materials. You may have seen the Scars Hurt signs at some of the local boat ramps, and those were put in by the aquatic preserves. That Be Seagrass Safe website has those materials. So it is a good idea to target that. Also, we found that hotels and rental properties are a great place, like places that are popular with visiting boaters are good places to start with some of that too. We have interns at boat ramps promoting it, handing out stickers. We're trying a lot of different things to get out ahead of this issue. All right, great. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
I'll hand it back to Ray here.
All right, everyone. So Scott and I are going to take you through a presentation about the scallop restoration project here in the Panhandle. We also have Emily Colson with us today. She's from our Cedar Key office, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about the data management, the volunteer management kind of volunteer part of the project. You guys have the pre-participation scallop sitter survey with you. If you could complete that while you're here and hand it in at the end of the day before you guys leave, that'd be great. That helps us out a lot with compiling some information. We greatly appreciate you filling out that pre-participation survey, and we greatly appreciate you guys being scallop sitter volunteers as well. You guys are it's just a great benefit to our scallop restoration project for you guys to be involved. And in the incoming slides, I will show you definitely how much you guys mean to us in this respect. We'll talk a little bit about bay scallop biology first, though. So here's our bay scallop, Argopecten irradians. So notice the top side of the shell on these are typically brown, kind of a dark brown. The lower part of the shell is white traditionally, but sometimes you'll see a little yellow or orange coloring in that as well. The bivalves, of course, and probably the one thing that sticks out from this picture, right, is the neon electric blue eyes around the outer shell there. So scallops have 40+ blue eyes that they use as sensory perception, so they can detect motion. It helps them detect predators in the waterways. So it's definitely a benefit for them. So we did have an embedded video here. Well, it doesn't work, so I'm gonna show you the video about how fast these guys can move through seagrass. So first of all, they clap their shells together to really move across the bottom of the ocean. Have you guys ever seen this before? Okay. I'm going to show you a quick video anyway. It's pretty neat. So, oh, look at there. See how they're just clapping? It's clapping the shell, moving across. Now the eyes have detected. Again, moving across the bottom of the ocean floor. That's pretty neat. So just to get an idea about how they move. So yeah, they're very quick swimmers, right? Here's a little diagram as well about the biological system of the scallop, the bay scallop. As you can see here, they're hermaphroditic. In other words, they have both male and female organs. They also have here, you can see the mantle area in the shell. This is the cavity where the abductor muscle is, and that's the part of the scallop that we like to eat, right? We don't typically eat the whole scallop, right? Like you would eat a oyster or a clam that way, but just about it. But some people do eat scallops like this, just on the half shell. Not me though, right? So, but anyway, typically this is the portion of the scallop that we eat right there, the abductor muscle. Now the shell height can get up to 3.5 inches, but typically in these waters here, probably 3 inches are about the height that you'll find maximum for the shells. A little bit about bay scallop reproduction. So they're broadcast spawners. So they release eggs and sperm into the water column. Takes about 36 hours for fertilization to occur. At that point, you get to the Veliger stage, which is sort of the pre-stage before you get into being a juvenile bay scallop. And that's about the time you get into a pelagic larval stage where they just kind of drift around the water column for 10 to 14 days. After that point, the spat or juvenile scallop are about the size of 0.3 millimeters, so they're still really tiny. And about the time they attach to seagrass, they're probably about 1 millimeter in size. And then shortly after that, they become adults and drop to the bottom. So they last about 1 to 2 years is their lifespan. The process of from egg to sperm to spat really is like a 90% mortality rate, so there's a real short window there of scallop production. Bay scallop feeding and predation. So scallops are filter feeders, so they really like to feast on the decaying plant material that's in the water column, but they also like the little microorganisms that are floating around in it too, that gives them some nutrition, the phytoplankton. We love scallops, right? Oh, come on. There are other animals that love scallops too, okay? So octopus, your crown conchs and oyster drills attack scallops. Your stingrays, especially your cow nose rays, blue crabs, stone crabs will just pulverize the shells. So we're not the only ones that find bay scallops delicious. One of the things, or two of the things really, that the bay scallop has going for it when it comes to predation is that their shells are really great camouflage as far as seagrass goes in that ecosystem, and they're really, really fast, as you saw. They can make some ground up by clapping and moving through the waterway. As Savannah was speaking about earlier, seagrass is the prime habitat, the perfect habitat for bay scallops. It's a great substrate, and generally when you have healthy seagrass population, you've got a lot of dissolved oxygen in the water. It's really rich, oxygen rich, and that's exactly what the bay scallop needs because of their gills. They need that oxygen. Like I said, there's typically really good water quality around these areas. Salinity needs to be between 20 and 35 parts per thousand in order for them to live. Temperature, and that comes into a play when we start talking about water quality. Scott will in a little bit later. Temperature needs to be between 50 and 90 degrees, water temp. But there's always threats. Red tide blooms that occur. We had one in 2014 and 2016. That was pretty significant here that killed off a lot of bay scallops. Pollutants like stormwater we were talking about earlier. Any material that gets into stormwater, non-point source pollution is a real problem. Large rainfall events where we change that salinity, we get more fresh water in the system than salt water. That causes lots of problems with scallop growth and high turbidity also. The water needs to be pretty clear for scallops to survive. Hydrometer, here's a picture of a hydrometer that's used to measure salinity. You guys will get one of those in your kit. Really easy to use. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. Some historical data on bay scallop fisheries. As far as the commercial operation went, we had a burgeoning commercial operation here in Florida up until the 60s. We had a really sharp decline, as you can see by this graph. 30s, 40s, not bad, 50s, mid-50s, and then there's a crash in the 60s, a really great decline. And as you can see, Florida Bay to Pensacola. So Florida Bay is down in the Keys. Okay, so we had commercial fisheries for bay scallops in the entire Gulf of Mexico, Florida. So this closed in '94 though. Why did it close? We had a collapse in the industry. Habitat loss is probably one of the factors. Land development, a lot of development along the coastlines of Florida can contribute to environmental changes. Water quality with stormwater effects coupled with that. Overfishing, no doubt there were times when they were overfishing in areas. And recruitment failure where you have juvenile scallops that just die off, and that's just a phenomenon that does happen. Our 2019 bay scallop season is quickly approaching us here for Gulf County. It's going to start August 16th and go through September 15th, so nearly a month long. You see some of the other counties in the Big Bend area, they're like 2.5 months almost long. Other than Pasco County this year, who has a really short 9-day season. But to harvest your gear requirements, you need a harvest permit. You can harvest by hand or by landing or dip net. And and equipment that you can use also with snorkeling and diving equipment. Daily bag limit is 2 gallons of whole bay scallops in the shell, or 1 pint of bay scallop meat per person. Now we're talking about vessels. That's a maximum of 10 gallons of whole bay scallops in the shell, or half gallon of bay scallop meat per vessel. So there's no size limit on that.
What counties are not going to be?
I'm sorry?
Oh, never mind. I see it.
Okay. So how do we know how healthy our bay is with scallops, right? How do we know how many scallops we have in the bay and if the population is healthy? Well, FWC does a great job of doing some bay scallop monitoring, and they do these annual surveys from May to August. And here you can see all the locations in the Gulf off of Florida that those scallop monitoring events are done. These are annual surveys again. They're 100-meter transects. It takes 2 divers, so they mark off 100 meters in areas, and they record the scallop shell height and the habitat type. So here's a good picture of some of that analysis there. So crunching that data. So here's the adult scallop densities, and this is a graph taken from when the Gulf waters became recreational waters as a whole, totally recreational waters. So 1994 to present, really, you can see with the orange here, this is St. Andrews Bay, the blue is St. Joseph Bay, and a couple of things that you can see here. We've been struggling a while with scallop populations, but check out how it really bottomed out in 14 and 16. What happened during those years? Red tide, right? Really wiped out the bay. But if you're looking at this and thinking, okay, well, what would be a healthy situation in the bay for scallop production? Anything above like 0.01 and 1. So if you take this block through here, if you have any data that falls in there, you're looking at a sustainable scallop fishery. Anything above that would be great, especially like this year with the survey data that's been captured so far. Looks like we're around 0.3 scallops per meter squared, so we'll be up in this range here, so that would be terrific. Some of the information from surveys at the end of last year painted a really dire situation with the bay here, but the survey that was done in the spring has really told an opposite story. We have a lot of scallops being produced there. Actually, this chart is a new chart that just came out. You can check FWC's website about this. So this is scallop densities per 200 meters squared. You can see Gulf is in black, and if you follow this line, it's starting in 2012, the data set, and look, it gets to 2018 and totally spikes. So what this data is telling us is that our bay is hopefully heavily populated with scallops. That doesn't mean that we don't need your help on this. We greatly still need your help on the project, but just to let you know, it looks like it's on an upswing.
Would that be also in conjunction with the shorter season and not overfishing?
Possibly.
I think it was a better idea to do it that way.
It could be because of the shortened seasons, or the just not having seasons or shorter seasons. Definitely, I would think would play a role. Hurricane Michael may have played a role in this too. When storm events, when hurricane forces like that happen, plants and animals can go through some hormone shakeup, and this may be something that's derived from the hurricane, where they just produced more eggs and sperm during that time, thinking they needed to reproduce more because of the event. It may have been a hormone issue that triggered this spike. We'll see. But the good news is, the take-home message is, it looks like those scallops in the bay are coming along nicely so far, naturally. So, goal of FWRI scallop restoration in the Florida Panhandle so is to increase the depleted scallop population in some bays and to reintroduce scallops in other suitable areas from which the scallops have disappeared. So it's definitely a worthwhile cause, right? One slide here about red tide in the bay. You can see, just to give you an idea of the effects, what can happen with red tide. So this data is taken from 2015 when we had that terrible red tide in St. Joe. But this was taken, so here's all the FWC monitoring stations across the state. You can see they're all green, so there's no present cyanobacteria data in that. It's all pretty clean water. So that was for the whole month of August, August 1st through the 31st. Fast forward to November. So November 1st to the 30th of 2015, and anything you see in red and yellow and orange are really high densities of the cyanobacteria that causes red tide. So you can see, just like on a dime, it really changed. And because of that, there was really almost no spat in the winter of 15 or spring in 2016. It just decimated the population with those neurotoxins. Here's a good close-up of our bay and the sampling stations in the bay where, as you see in red, yellow, and orange, especially red, was a very high count of bacteria for red tide. Orange was about medium there, and the yellow was low, but still a high occurrence in that region. So methods of restoration, so just scallop restoration as a whole for the bay. So collect brood stock from the St. Joe Bay, and that's something that FWC does periodically, as well as scallop rodeos, where we enlist volunteers to come out and help collect scallops for this purpose. We have some slides a little bit later on about that. There is an event coming up in St. Andrews Bay on Saturday. We'll have one here in St. Joe on August the 3rd. So that's coming up. So if you're interested in that, please, we'd love to have your help on that. So anyway, collecting adult brood stock, that there's the scallop babies that can be found through hatchery involvement. So FWC partners with the Bay Shellfish Company to provide larvae or spat. So there's a partnership there in order to get spat. There's also a project on the other side of that coin where FWC uses really these citrus bags and sinks them to the bottom with cinder blocks to catch spawn in areas where there are known significant populations of scallops. And this is what they get: a bag full of spat at the right time, and then that spat is taken to the Florida State University Coastal and Marine Lab, where it is grown. That's where the scallop juveniles are grown and can be reintroduced into the bay safely. So in 2017, switching gears a little bit, this is when the predator exclusion cages came about, okay? And why do we want to use cages like these, right? It keeps predators out so scallops can live and do their thing, right? So cages likely increase the number of offspring produced. How do holding scallops in cages increase the offspring produced? It's really twofold. So here's a wild scallop scenario, right? Relatively low scallop densities in St. Joe Bay and St. Andrews Bay. So there's a low chance of fertilization occurring because there's just not, most times there's just not that many and they're spread apart. Cage scallops. So if they're caged, they're protected from predation. There's a large group of them. And just think, if you have large groups in an area, you're going to have a higher fertilization rate because you've got a mass of living scallops in cages that are very close to each other. It just really increases the fertilization success.
How many scallops are going to fit in each cage?
50. So just to illustrate too, and to give you an idea of the impact of the Scallop Sitter program. So the Scallop Bay Restoration Program, here are some of the numbers from year to year. So monthly maximum scallop numbers in cages So FWC in 2016 had about 2,400, about 2,100 in 2017. These are solely FWC projects. When the Scallop Sitter program was instituted in 2018, you can see how many scallops we had involved in the Bay Restoration Project. So, Scallop Sitters, this program is for St. Joseph and St. Andrew Bay. 200 cages maintained by volunteers, roughly 147 for St. Andrews Bay, 53 cages for St. Joe Bay, 50 scallops in 2019 per volunteer. That's going to be roughly about 5,000 scallops maintained by volunteers. And we're talking over 400 volunteer hours that that the program puts together that you guys help out with, which we greatly appreciate. And we want to thank you for helping us with this. I've got a couple of slides here to show just some photos that FWC as well as Scallop Sitters have taken over the last couple of years. Here you can see some of the cages and some of the scallops that were grown in those cages. There's the hydrometer again. Here is a Scallop Sitter volunteer with a bay cage, with kayak out in the bay, about to set those up. There's some cleaning going on there of the scallops, and just overall fun time on the bay, right? With that, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about water quality, and we'll talk further about the demonstration of the bay cages.
About kind of some of the lessons that we learned last year, and one of the big lessons that we learned was about how water runoff and stormwater runoff can affect scallops. How many of you were involved with the project last year? Okay, so a lot of you were. So I'd like to hear from you as we move along, not just about the water part. That was kind of something that was really obvious, but other little tips, tricks we've been learning from each other. When we get to talk about the Facebook page in a little bit, so that's some of the things that we're trying to get started, was just people trying to talk to each other, learn from each other, be inspired by each other. So we want to kind of continue some of that today. My home is in Bay County. I live in the Lynn Haven area. So I am been involved with St. Andrew Bay for a number of years now. And it's kind of like what Savannah was talking about. A lot of our marine habitats are impacted right now and require a little bit of help. And one of the things that's quite obvious is the amount of rainfall that we have, and just some of the changes in some of the weather patterns that we've seen over the time that I've been here. I've been here for about 20 years. Some of our farmers that I've worked with in the northern part of the western part of Florida in Jefferson County, their observations have been that we don't get any difference in the amount of rainfall. Just the timing of the rainfall comes sparsed out a little bit further, and it comes all at once. So what they've done is they do cover crops, and so they have on top of their general crops that they already grow, they plant a second crop just to mitigate the water and help to make sure that when it does rain and it comes all at one time, it kind of eases into the ground and it doesn't run off and it doesn't evaporate really well. We're still trying to learn how we do those types of changes where we live, along the coastal area. So it may be that we work on, stormwater retention ponds a little bit more than we used to. I know where we are, we're looking at expanding Highway 22 going to Weewahitchka, and we've got a whole nother set of stormwater retention ponds that we're going to be putting in just so that we can avoid some of the things like we've been seeing with what we did last year. The areas around our airport, as far as like in Bay County goes, just like you have here, we have the Intercoastal Waterway. Those areas are some areas that you'll see when I show you the next pictures. The changes in salinity that we witnessed last year were documented. Besides taking care of scallops, scallop sitters are really good at collecting data and information and working on getting us a better picture of how we be more successful. Where might we put scallops this year that we maybe should prioritize, where those locations might be, and then what areas should we avoid? And that's kind of what we're going to talk about in these next few slides. So typically April, May, and up to the first couple of weeks of June, we start to get just kind of really light rainfall. But once the loop current kicks in this part of the world, we end up with those afternoon thunderstorms. And when we get to July or the last few weeks of June, all the way through August, are pretty wet months for us. Those are some of the wettest months typically that we have in the Panhandle. And you'll see that in the pictures as to what the salinities were and the changes that we saw. The green dots here are where we had scallop cages. We did our training earlier last year than what we did this year. We wanted to wait to have larger scallops, and so that's one of the changes that we've learned from last year is we won't have the little bitty guys to start with that were in like the small mesh bags, but we're going to go to a larger adult size scallop. So waiting a little bit puts us almost right into the middle of some of the rainy season. But you'll see the kind of the story that unfolded as it relates to the time of the year and the rainfall that we got. So April's looking pretty good. And this is in St. Andrew Bay. And then May's looking really nice. These darker colors up here are some of the salinities that are greater than 25 parts per thousand or grams per liter. The ocean is around 35, so that gives you an idea of about how high the salinities were. As we move forward into June, we started to see some of that begin to change with the rainfall picking up in the afternoons. July still looks pretty good in our West Bay area. But when we got into August, you can see not only did we start to see the salinity drop, but we see the numbers of actual cages that have large numbers surviving scallops inside those cages actually start to go away. And by the time we get to August, we really are starting to see some impact. And in September, we've lost a lot of our scallops that were there that would potentially spawn. And that kind of really put a damper on some of the, I guess, how successful we were last year. About this time, right before we opened harvesting for oysters, end of September, first part of October, we ended up with red tide in our bay, and FDAX was monitoring for that. And so we had lots of rainfall, red tide, and then the storm hit. And so in October, we were really completely just wiped out. And I know a lot of you, like we are, or were affected by the storm. So I really appreciate you stepping back up again. The guy called me in our break earlier today. We just got back into our office last week. We have an air conditioner. We don't have any carpeting. So they're coming to bring the carpeting. So little steps, baby steps at a time gets us all back to where we need to be. But we really appreciate you stepping up to help us again. So let's look, knowing that this happened in St. Andrew Bay, let's look at Jaws Bay a little bit closer. And you'll see some of the same themes, but it's just going to be a little bit better. Just to let you know, like I was talking about before I switch over to St. Joe Bay, we're going to limit where we put scallops because of what we learned last year. So between the halfway bridge that goes across over to Panama City and then back over this way toward the DuPont Bridge as you go out toward Tyndall, we're going to stay in this more stable area right here when we get to the folks that are that we're training for, say, Andrew Bay. But that's what we're trying to look at. There's not going to be any restriction on St. Joe Bay, okay? So just use your best judgment when you start to place your scallop cages. Don't put them near outfalls from drains or near the intercoastal waterway or places where you know that there's a chance for a large change in salinity. When they're in the cage, they can't swim off like we saw in those pictures. You know, you're going to have to make those kind of decisions for you. When we get ready here in just a little bit, then we'll get some additional help too. Okay. All right. So this is April, looking pretty good, and again into May, June, we start to pick up some of those afternoon showers. Start to see a little bit over here as you go out toward the Cape with some lower salinities, but still pretty good survivability in those areas. These cages over here are doing really well on both sides of St. Joe Bay. This is in July. See a few less numbers of scallops, but overall we're still seeing pretty good survivability. And if you look right here where the intercoastal comes in August, you end up with nothing there by the time we get to September. I'm not saying that that's good, bad, or indifferent as far as that goes, but just those types of areas are the ones that we want to try to look at where we could maybe move a little ways away from. So we learned that freshwater, especially in our bay, back home in Bay County, is often very fresh. We learned that the smaller scallops are kind of a little bit harder, a little bit more difficult to get through some of the initial stages. So you'll have some, having learned from that, we reacted with the changes in where we're going to locate the scallops. We gave you bigger scallops. The other thing that we wanted to try to do today, and I think, Emily, you were working with folks as they came in, we want to make sure that we have the numbers for our law enforcement people to have the GPS coordinates. If you give it to us either in decimal degrees or decimal minutes, either one, we can pass that along for any time that we have any suspected poaching or problems with people that have taken the scallops. That happened in our bay. I know it happened here. We talked to other volunteers that were involved in poaching, I guess reporting those types of illegal activities. And one of the first things that law enforcement asked me for is like, where are the GPS coordinates? We had everybody's address, but they couldn't figure out where to go when they sent their boats out. So they're going to usually send somebody that's a game warden. They may be on the water already and they may not come to your house. And a lot of our cages aren't just at people's docks, they're also in the bay. So having those numbers are really, really important so that we can get those cases processed and hopefully add some deterrence to those types of illegal activity. The other thing that's going to be a really good deterrent is a natural deterrent, is the one that Ray was happy to show you, is Kelly's group, and some of their efforts over the last few years have hopefully been successful in raising the number of scallops that we have. So hopefully having more scallops will reduce the amount of tampering with cages and that kind of stuff over time. We're going to reveal a little bit about some of the improvements that we've made in the data collection activity. We have a new Google spreadsheet document that should be easier to work with. And the other improvement is Emily Colson being able to work directly with her. And she's working here to communicate with you if you have any questions or anything, or you want to send her data or help you kind of get used to where we're putting the data. She's going to be kind of a coach and a person to kind of make sure things go well. And then we promised we're not going to have another Hurricane Michael. That name's been retired. And if we do have another storm, though, one of the things that we learned from that is we probably do not want to leave any scallops in cages or anything like that. We'll be more proactive in our instructions on what to do. The best advice is to move those cages into, out of the water, put the scallops, in the seagrasses where they can move away and have a better chance of survival and contributing to any type of spawn or anything else. But we won't be thinking about that until it's absolutely more definite, and we're going to be watching and be proactive, just like we would with your getting your boats ready or something like that. That's about the time that we would say, okay, we need to be thinking about the cages. While you're getting your boats ready, let's move these cages out of the way. We lost all of our cages that were stored in our storage building when a big tree hit and took them out. We couldn't even get in there to to recover them this year. So they had to rebuild all the cages. And we'll show you the new improved design here in just a minute. We're going to try to just make sure, and some of this is just repeat, limit the cage area so that we got better survivability. There's a lot of time invested in what you do. There's a lot of time invested in what the biologists have done to raise the scallops up to provide them to you. And we just don't want to put them in places like we talked about that may cause a problem. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit. And so I want to invite you to do something that most of you probably haven't done, and that's go scalloping in St. Andrew Bay this weekend. So we have one day a year that we get to go out and get scallops. And so the rodeo is that time. How many of you did the rodeo either here or over in St. Joe Bay last year? How did y'all do? Y'all maxed out? Y'all did you get 100? Is that where you were at?
I think we're 50.
50 each? Okay, this year we're going to be able to get up to 100. I did the rodeo with Kelly Williams last year. You want to come up, Kelly, and then we'll move over and transition to the other side here in just a minute. But Kelly was my person from FWC. FWC is in charge of the rodeos, and the rodeo is one way that we can maximize the number of scallops that we are holding for the opportunity to spawn and produce scallops. And so these one-day events are just another tool that FWC uses to make that happen and make stock enhancement work. And so the scallop restoration programs work. And so we're going to do that this Saturday. And Kelly, you want to talk to him about check-in and that kind of stuff? I'll let you just kind of hold on a second here. You can just hold it if you want.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. All right. So on Saturday will be our Bay County Rodeo. We'll have 3 boat ramps. We're asking you to check in anytime after 8 a.m. and you have to check out before 6 p.m. So you can meet us either at the St. Andrews City Ramp, the Panama City Ramp, or the St. Andrews State Park. We're going to have biologists at each of those ramps, and essentially you would check in with us in the morning. You'll sign some paperwork. You'll get a waiver that allows you to possess scallops in a closed scalloping area, and we'll give you some tips on where you might want to look and other things. And then you'll go out and have a great day on the water, and you'll bring, if you find any scallops, you'll keep them in a big old bucket of water. The more frequent you can change the water, the better. And you'll bring them back to us at the end of the day. So right after 6 p.m. when the cutoff is, me and a couple of my coworkers are going to launch our boat, and we're actually going to take all those scallops down. We have some large restoration cages that are anchored to the bottom. Oh, yep. And we're going to put those, the scallops in those large restoration cages. So this will be the first time that we're really expanding our restoration efforts in St. Andrews. We've had a ton of scallops in St. Joe the last 3 years, but this is the first year where we're going to have some massive cages down in Andrews to help with that restoration effort. So we're hoping that the rodeo is going to bring us a good number of scallops from St. Andrews. We'll see. We have not done our surveys there yet this year, so we don't know what to expect. However, we're not that far from St. Joe, and St. Joe looks really good. So we'll see. But yeah, this is a great opportunity to get out there. It's also a really fun way of getting an introduction to scalloping without 1,000 other boats that you're continging with. So that's nice. And then for the St. Joe Rodeo, we're going to do that again before the season opens. So it'll be Saturday, August 3rd. It'll be the same thing. You can check in anytime after 8 a.m. You just have to check out before 6 p.m. And we'll have the 3 ramps. It'll be Presnell's, Frank Pate, and the State Park will be our 3 ramps. And again, at the end of the day, we're going to put all the scallops that we collect down in our large restoration cages. So does anybody have questions about the rodeo?
Rodeo's fun. And, I hope you'll come join us this Saturday. It'll be really a good day on the water.
Yeah.
And good time to get out and also raise awareness about scallops as to what we're doing and where we are on the process. And hopefully this will help us get to that day that we can actually go and have not just one day, but, months and weeks at a time. Kelly's got a few things that she's going to show us real quick, and then we're going to let her just kind of do a demo on what you need to do through all the stuff. So just tomorrow, actually today, some of this stuff you'll get in your bags. So inside of there, you should be able to have your hydrometers, your oyster knife, okay, and then the gloves. I saw some gloves back there, and a scrub brush. You should be able to get those today. And then later on tomorrow, we'll give you a bucket, a lid, the rope, the float, and the brick. And then we're going to give you either a dock cage or just a regular bay cage. And we were just showing on the bay cage because, you know, pretty much you just have a float. So I'm going to turn it over to you right now and let you do that.
All right. So, yeah, as we were saying, you guys already got some of your supplies, and you'll be getting the rest of them tomorrow when you pick up your scallops and your cages. So this is our bay cage. Now, for those of you who did it last year, you'll see that we have modified the design. In order to reduce our reliance on single-use plastics, we no longer use zip ties. So we have a bungee method. So these bungees will already come. Everything, when you receive your cage, it'll look exactly like this, minus the dead scallop shells inside. So you will have already the bungee system, the rope and the float if you're getting a bay cage. Otherwise, if it's a dock cage, it'll just be a rope, no float. So yes, so the first thing that we modified this year was the bungee. So it's just a single bungee that comes across and you clip it to the bottom, and that gives a really nice hold. There's you know, they're not going to be able to get out of here. We did a lot of testing on these the last few months. So that's the first thing. The second is our leg design. We made the legs a little bit longer, and we had them stick up a little higher, which actually helps to hold the lid in place. So you don't have a shift. What we had last year, some lids kind of were sideways and you'd have a gap. So this year we made sure the legs are set in a way that it's going to hold the lid together. And then we added feet. So this gives the cage a little more stability. You're less likely to have a tumbleweeding cage that's just rolling through the bay, because they do that. So those are the modifications for this year. It's still your bay cage is going to have the brick, just like it did last year, and the rope and the float going to the top. Now, if you decide to modify your cage, that's perfectly fine. If you want to add more weight to it, if you want to play with your foot design, the biggest thing that we care about is as long as the scallops are in good water quality and they're deep enough that they're not affected by tide. So essentially, you just want them to have 4 feet of water, ideally at a low tide, because they are a little more temperature. They can be intolerant to really high temperatures when you have a combination of high temperatures and heavy rainfall. So getting them deeper is going to allow them to stay in that good saltier water. Okay, so each month you're going to come up to your cage, whether it's on your dock or out in the bay, and you'll pull your cage up out of the water. You'll undo your bungee, open it up, and you'll see all your beautiful little babies inside. And so you'll pull out your scallops. And the biggest thing that we're looking on this year, so we're increasing. Last year, the cages had 25 scallops in each cage. This year, we're giving you 50 scallops, and we're also starting with much larger scallops. Last year, some of them were the size of my pinky nail. It was very small. We had no idea how quickly our scallops were going to grow, so we thought that last year they were going to be bigger. Anyways, we're learning things. That's why we delayed this year, and we have bigger scallops. Because you have 50 scallops per cage, we're not going to ask you to clean every single thing off these scallops. It's just going to become too much in the later summer months when the fouling gets really bad. We're going to ask you to focus on 2 areas on the scallops. You need to clean the hinge, and this allows them to open and close. So you essentially just want to make sure that there is no fouling organisms, no barnacles, no oysters, no anything else on this back hinge area. So you just clean that with your oyster knife. And then the same thing, you just want to make sure there's nobody growing across that would affect their ability to get water flow in and out and to feed. So it's the front and it's the back. And then if you really, if you are a wonderful scallop parent and you really want to clean the top of that shell, by all means do it, but just do not feel obligated to clean the top or the bottom as much as the hinge and the front. Those are the essentials for this year. So when you're cleaning this edge, I would say make sure that you hold the shell kind of closed and then just work a little bit. Like if you have a single, really you shouldn't have to touch the front unless you actually see an oyster on there, and then you just work on that. If they are not wanting to close, I would say don't bother with it, because really all you're trying to do is clean something that's preventing them from opening. So if they're already opening up, I would say it's no problem. It's just if you see one that's unable to open all the way or it's getting near clogged. And then, so the other thing is obviously water quality and water flow is very important to scallops because that's how they feed. So with more scallops in our cages this year, maintenance per scallop might not be as high, but we definitely want to focus on our cage maintenance. So that's where your scrub brush is going to come into play. You want to just scrub the entirety of your cage, top, bottom, and sides, so that the water can get in and out of your cage easily with the tide and allow your scallops to feed. So that's, I mean, all you have to do is the external side of your cage. You don't actually have to scrub inside, because these brushes are good enough that if you just do the outside, it pretty well cleans both sides. You're welcome to clean the inside, but you know, again, you don't have to. So those are the essentials as far as cage and scallop maintenance as the month goes. Yes.
How long can the scallops like stay out of the water?
So that's a great question. What we would recommend is when you go to your cage, bring your bucket with you and have, so if you're on a boat, this is easy. If you're on a kayak or wading, it's a little trickier, but it's still doable. Bring a bucket or something else where you can take your scallops, instead of just having them sit. Since you have 50 scallops this year, it's going to take longer. You don't want them sitting out for too long. They can sit out for, 10 minutes is fine, but I would not want them out for, 30 minutes. So basically grab them and put them in a bucket, and then just one by one clean your scallops. And so at the same time, when you get your bucket for your scallops while you're cleaning them, you're going to use your hydrometer to measure salinity. So this, you're just going to dip in your bucket and you're going to fill it to the fill line, and then the needle here will move and it'll give you your salinity reading. Now, all we care about is the big number. We don't care about decimal points this year. Just give us a nice round number is what we're looking for salinity. So once a month, go to your cage, open it up, put your scallops in a bucket, clean your scallops, put them back in the cage, scrub the cage clean, or scrub the cage clean while they're still in a bucket, whichever way works for you, and take your salinity reading. And then you'll just put your bungee back in, nice and easy, and redeploy your cage. Let's see, what else? Oh, yes, that's another change this year. We are only doing one cage per scallop sitter. If you if it's becoming too much, if your cage is just getting too fouled and you need a second cage, you can reach out to us and we'll facilitate you getting a second cage. However, we think that one cage should be sufficient if you do a thorough brushing of your cage once a month, that should keep your cage in good enough shape to last through January. It doesn't have to, by no means do we have expectations that the cages are going to look like this in January. Our cages don't look remotely this nice. We just essentially, the idea is as long as water can get through it, you're in good shape. Let's see, what else? I don't know, any other questions?
Does the cage need to be in the same spot the entire time?
So yes, so if you change cage location more than, let's say, from here to the storage units there, I would say you should probably report the changed location to us. But if it's, if it's maybe within 1,000 feet of the current location, I think it's fine. A lot of times you're on the boat, you pick up your cage, you throw your anchor, inevitably you're going to drift a little bit, and then you redeploy, and I think that's fine. As long as you kind of, Oh, yes. So if you have an issue like that, if you notice, oh, wow, I had a lot of scallop mortality, I think I want to change my location and I'm going to put it over on the state park side instead of town side or whatever, just let us know. Just let us know when you changed it and what the number of alive scallops were when you moved it to the new location. That way we can track what mortality was at the old location versus mortality at the new location. Oh, true. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But as long as you approach your cage, if you go ahead and, as soon as you grab your cage, you throw your anchor, and then if you just redeploy once you're already at anchor, I think that's fine. I don't think the digits are going to be off all that much. And the other thing is cage placement. So for dock cages, you're more limited, obviously. You want to go as deep as you can go on your dock to put these cages. The deeper, the better. For bay cages, we would like a minimum of 4 feet at low tide, and we would also like it to be adjacent to seagrass, which would be their natural habitat, but not on top of seagrass. Because, these bricks and these legs, if these cages were to tumble, if we got a bad storm event, we don't want to cause another thing to just tear up our seagrass, So with St. Joe, it's really easy because you'll find little pockets, natural pockets of sand throughout the seagrass. They're usually around, it's not hard to find them. And those are great spots for putting a cage because it'll keep the scallops near, natural or, all of these scallops were St. Joe wild caught scallops. Everything that you're getting, my team collected in the last month from St. Joe Bay. So you're getting St. Joe scallops. They're staying in St. Joe. It's just we're putting them in protective cages. So yes, putting them near seagrass, but not on seagrass, and in 4 feet of water at low tide. And not near any kind of freshwater source, which is kind of easy to tell in this bay because typically those freshwater sources, at least in the summer, are going to run pretty tannic. So just avoid the dark brown water. Keep it clear, and the scallops will be happy. Yeah, any other questions? Yes.
Last year, we were given like a laminated tag to go on.
Yes. Yeah, so when you pick up your cage tomorrow, we're going to put the label on for you right on the top, and that'll have the an individual number. Each cage will have its own number, and then we'll link that cage number to your coordinates and to your name. That way we can track which cage is where, or if a cage ends up, somebody finds it offshore like they did last year, we can track down who it belonged to. Yeah, it says like do not touch FWC, and it has the permit number, and then it has the cage number. And then so these buoys are the same. It's the same permit number as last year. So it's the Special Activity License 2012. And this basically is what our law enforcement agents, they know to look for this. And that's a scallop sitter cage. So everybody is going to have the exact same number here. It's just they might be red or yellow floats. There's no difference. The color doesn't define anything. It's just that's what to look for. So if you you see more of them out there, that's great. It's just more of your fellow scallop sitters. But yeah, and the other thing is, if you do have a lot of them in one area, it might get tricky. So that's why we do have the unique number on each cage. So you can pull it up and be like, oh, whoops, that wasn't actually mine. Put it back down and grab yours. Yeah, any other questions? Yes.
What's normal mortality? Say there's 50 in there. If you only have 1 or 2 dead, don't worry about it? Or?
Yeah, honestly, normal mortality, we expect these scallops by January, we would expect the majority of them to be dead because they only live a year, especially in the wild. So we expect over the course, we don't expect you to have one massive mortality event, but I would expect anywhere from 2 to 3 a month to be dead. And then especially as you get after November, I think you'll see increased mortality. However, if you do really good maintenance, you might see that you might have 48 scallops still alive in January. It really depends. Most of these scallops are probably about 6 months old right now. So they should have another 6 months in that life cycle, and they should spawn in the fall. Kind of that first cold snap typically triggers their spawn. So it would be great if we had them in the cages that whole time and got the spawn out of them. So we'll see. But yeah, I would not be frightened by mortality. It's totally natural for them, and it's within their normal life cycle, and it's something to expect. So, but I would say if you went to your cage and you saw that you had more than 12 or, I'd say anything more than 10 dead on a single month, and it was one of these first few months, then you might want to think about, okay, well, maybe it's water quality issues or temperature or something else, and then it's worth reevaluating location. But again, if you have any questions like that, just shoot an email to Emily or one of us, and we can complete, or actually just put it on the Facebook group, because everybody's going to monitor that too. So we'll keep everybody posted. The other thing I forgot to mention when you're opening up your cages and cleaning them is look for predators, because everybody loves scallops. We love scallops. Everybody loves to eat them. So even little sea stars in here, they like them. The little orange conchs, the horse conchs, they are very small and they can get inside the cage when they're young, and then they have an all-you-can-eat scallop buffet. So if it's not a scallop, kick it out of the cage. So that's your best bet on those guys. And we'll see predators that, there's some smart ones out there. They'll sit on the outside of the cage and just put their muscles and everything in, and they'll wait for a scallop to essentially open up and get in there, and then just pull the scallop through the cage. So it's a thing. But that's why we're giving you 50 this year in hopes that you've still got some scallops come October. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yes. To visit once a month and we get busy and it's a month of the week. Is that dangerous to the welfare of the cage?
No, I would, I would try and say, like, either you go in the first half of the month or the second half of the month and try and keep it consistent. Well, we completely understand. There are months where the weather is so bad you only have 4 days you can potentially get out each month, and you get blown out on all 4 of those. What can you do? They're going to be fine. We've had to leave, actually, following Hurricane Michael, we were not able to recover some of our cages until January, and they were still alive. And the last time they had been checked was September. So they can survive. They're not going to be in great shape, but they'll survive. So if you have to miss it by a week or two, that's not a big deal. Just let us keep us informed on that too, because we'll be looking on our document and we'll say, oh, that's weird, they haven't checked in for this month yet. But then if you just let us know, oh, I'm just running a week late or this or that, that's perfectly fine.
All right, so you can see on this slide what we really need is name, date, number of live scallops, and salinity. Pretty straightforward. If anyone's familiar with Google Drive and the Google Doc, you can basically send a link of a document and everyone can edit the same document. I can help you walk through that process. If you don't feel confident in those types of software, you can always just send me an email and give me those numbers and I'll plug it in myself. But you can see on the bottom there, we start with cage number and your name. So I think tomorrow, as we give your cages out, I'll just go ahead and plug that information in along with your GPS coordinate if you give it to us tomorrow or today. If not, just send it to me at any time and I'll make sure we record that as well. I'm going to add a little column in there for GPS coordinate. And then we follow with the bay you're in. And then following is each of the months, along with salinity and number of scallops. So this is just an example here with Mr. Joe Smith. But you can see that it's very straightforward. Like we said earlier, we just need nice round numbers. We're not looking for 0.5, 0.2, whatever. Just give us the round number for salinity and then number of live scallops. So try to clean the scallops, take a salinity reading first week of every month or last week, however you want to work it out, but try and just keep it consistent. And if you do, miss out on a good day to go out, you can always just email me and let me know, hey,
this is what's going on, and I'll update it in my spreadsheet. People also ask, well, what if we go out more than once a month and we clean the scallops and take these readings? That's great. That's more information for us. So just shoot me another email or add it in there. I think that shooting me an email would be the best in that scenario, just because we really just need one reading per month on this spreadsheet. But if you have any other information that you want to give us, that's great as well. So just let me know that you're going out more.
Date associated with the salinity in the month. That's a big job.
Yeah, we can enter a little spot for the exact date that you went out as well. And that'll show us exactly, how spread apart these were taken. So I'll work on this spreadsheet a little more. But yeah, so it's very straightforward. And if you have any additional comments, just let me know. And, if you're having trouble working it, I'd rather you just send me the information and I'll help you plug it in. So,
So you just want us to email you separately with our GPS coordinate system?
yeah, we can talk about that today, and we can even pull it up on a phone. We can talk about it tomorrow as well when you get your cage. If you just don't know yet, and you get out there and you have it then, just send that to me and I'll plug it in.
I'd rather get something today just in case something happens.
Right.
Sometimes we got lost if we did have some type of case, especially we might see these early on. We would like to have a GPS of where you think you might go, and then if it's different, then update it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, and then the next slide kind of talks about our Facebook page. It is called Florida Panhandle Scallop Sitters. It is a private group, and you have to request to be added, but we'll accept it. And basically, we want you to feel open to posting updates and interact with everyone else that's in the group. We like to see how your scallops are doing. We like to know, what's happening to them. And a lot of people utilize it for just talking to other people. Like if they find someone else's, cage out somewhere where it probably shouldn't be, then they get on there and talk to people. I'll be monitoring that as well and kind of giving you feedback and liking your posts if you have a lot of scallops alive. So we like to see pictures and all that. So I encourage you to go look at that today and follow us. And yeah.
Right.
Anything else?
There, Kelly did this portion of it already. So Ray, I think we're about ready to wrap up.
Yeah, so
Give you
tomorrow,
the-
I guess I need this, don't I?
Yeah.
7:30 to 11:30, but if you can make it a little after, say 8 o'clock would be good. If you must pick them up before then, we'll help you out. Questions today, guys?
There's a pamphlet that details everything you need to do on a monthly basis. It's like a scallop maintenance pamphlet in your folder.
Okay. Yeah, in your folder, you'll have a pamphlet that details all the processes that you need to do monthly as a scallop sitter. So please check that out. We'll also post those online. Yes.
So we're putting them in the water tomorrow.
Yep. That would be ideal. Yep.
So you want us to then take a reading for July?
Do we take a reading for? Yes, we would take a reading for July. Take a salinity. Take a salinity reading. Yes.
We'll assume that there's 50 alive.
Yes.